Hello and a very warm welcome to today's video. This is the first of a series where we explore our solar production figures across the month, and today we're going to be covering January 2025. So as a recap of my arrays, on the south side I have 5.16 kilowatts peak, made up of 12 SunPower Maxeon 3 430 watt panels. That's accompanied by a SolarEdge 5 kilowatt inverter and optimizers across all panels. On the east and west side, which at the moment is quite heavily shaded, we have 440 watt REA Fusion 2 panels. There's 10 of them, split 5 either side. And they have Enphase IQ8 HC microinverters. For more information about my arrays and kind of detailed breakdown of why I chose each of those components for each side of the roof, I do have a video for that, so I'll put the link in the description. But let's move on to the figures for the month then. So looking exclusively at the south array to begin with then, we had quite a mixed month. I would say overall it's been a pretty good month of January. Obviously January you don't expect numbers that are too high, but we had some good days in there. So looking at the diagram here, the 2nd was pretty good, the 25th was very good indeed, and also the 30th were good days. We did have some bad days as well. The 1st was horrendous. I think most of that day had snow, and then the 19th, that was another very, very poor one, but a nice mixture across the month. And I think overall, with an output of 186 kilowatts, that's pretty strong across the south array. For the east and west side, because Enphase present their graphs in a little bit of an unusual way, and it's scaled badly due to the import and export from the batteries, I thought it would be more beneficial to show how much energy each individual panel has produced. I thought that was quite beneficial, given these sides, the east and the west, are working from microinverters, and shading is a big issue across the month of January, where the sun's so low. So we have a lower output of around 53.5 for the month of January, but we can see what the proportion of energy produced on the south side was versus the east side. So 78% of the energy produced was on the south array, and 22% was from the east and west side. So looking at the highest generation days then of the month of January, there were two real contenders for this. In fact, they were nearly identical in their output. The best one was January the 30th, but looking at the graph, you can see there's a lot of moments of cloud. It was an interesting day. It was very, very intense sunshine, but it did sometimes duck behind some slightly dark clouds. It did give us a peak production from the south side of just over 4 kilowatts there, so it was very, very powerful. It just wasn't this purely sunny day. In contrast, January 25th, it was mostly sunny. There was very, very few clouds on that day, but the sun just wasn't quite as powerful. It was just a little bit hazy in the sky, and of course, with the the sun height being just that little bit lower, it only gave us a peak production of 3.54 in the middle of the day. Rather unsurprisingly, those same 2 days were the highest generation on the east and west side, but there was a bit more between the two of them. So January the 30th, that gave us 3.64, whereas January 25th only gave us 2.97. Now this was again down to shading, but if you look at every single panel apart from that one there, just on the east side, on the left, bottom left one, which seems to have identical output of 350 watt hours. Apart from that, every other panel had better performance on the 30th, and that's just because it's slightly less shaded, literally just from being 5 days further along. So that was interesting. Obviously bodes well going forward, because as these get out of the shade, they'll be able to contribute a lot more. On to the lowest generation days then. The 1st of January was indeed the worst, and here we have a comparison between the south and the east and west, and rather surprisingly, the east and west on that day actually won against the south, producing 310 watt hours rather than 260. Now that's an interesting result, given that the east and west side panels, the REA Fusion 2s with the microinverters, were in fact purchased for the reason of being good in low light conditions. So perhaps that's a sign that this was working. However, you could also say that because it's at a 45-degree angle rather than a 40-degree angle, and we did have snow from the previous day, the most likely scenario here is that the snow simply cleared that little bit quicker on the east and west sides over the south side. However, that's not the only example of the east and west sides producing a little bit more on a low light condition day. 19th of January, which was the second worst day for production, there was a similar trend, so 340 versus 297. So maybe, just maybe, things are working pretty well for those REAs. In fact, looking in isolation for that particular day, 19th of January, 54% of the generation was from the east and west side, which perhaps shows some potential in those kind of conditions. So on to generation targets then for the month of January. I have two. I have one from the installer, which I believe to be a little ambitious, and I also got some from PV Watts, which is a utility which gives generation predictions based on past data. So you can type in your system and various information about your roof, and it will spit out a lot of data. Now, interestingly, the month of January is very, very far apart on both of them. Most other months, they're quite close, those targets. So the good news was we overperformed the PV Watts estimate by 77 kilowatts, which is great, and we're only 3 short of the installer target, which I think is pretty strong. Here we have an annual generation graph for the south array. We have a full year's data from 2024, also a very small amount of 2023. But looking at 2025, that's the dark green line. It's just shy of last year. Last year we had a really, really good January. It was actually better than the February that came after it. But I think that's a solid start to the year. Moving on to the east and west generation targets. I've split this down to east and west. We have that detailed information from PV Watts. Once again, we have some slightly ambitious data from the installers. They gave a total which I questioned them on, because it was obvious that those winter ones were just wrong given the shape of the roof. So they gave me a reduced version, which was 20% less. Again, it wasn't very accurate, because they just took 20% off the entire year rather than taking the shading into account properly. So that was unfortunate that they didn't give particularly accurate estimates on this, but the PV Watts ones give a good baseline. Of course, with January only predicted to come in at 41, that's expected to double in February, and then expected to double once again for March. So although they met the targets there, they have a lot to prove in the coming months, so that'll be exciting. So here that is in graph form. Looking at January, we do have data there comfortably above the PV Watts and below those installer estimates. We do also have data for November and December of last year, of 2024 that is, and you can see that again it's been pretty close to those PV Watts targets, just above them, and quite a long way below the installer targets. So it should be really interesting to see how that ramps up over the course of the year. The installer targets and the PV Watts ones just weren't that different, actually. On to combined generation of both arrays together then, and both systems being above their PV Watts estimate makes that a good start. And looking forward to the future, there could be some big months there, May, June and July, all expected to produce over 1,000 kilowatts, which would be awesome if that's the case. Here is our import versus export. We have a net import of 462, so we hope that number can come down fairly significantly for February. This shows how savings were achieved over the course of the month as a result of the solar and the battery, so that's a total of £67 for this month. Onto energy reliance, and we were self-powered for 59% of the time. It could have been a lot higher, but due to our time of use tariffs, where the peak import price was 25.5 pence and the off-peak import was as low as 8.5 pence, being on the Octopus Go tariff, that meant that during the night, during that off-peak time, we were using 100% of the grid power, storing that in the batteries and then using that during the day. So the Powerwall was powering us during the day, and a lot of the excess solar then was exported for 15 pence. So the estimated bill for January 25 comes in at around £51.19. That's made up of £49, 30 pence off-peak import. Peak import would be just over £1. Export would be £18.44, and unfortunately that standing charge, which is now as high as 61.5 pence per day, would make up £19.08. So unfortunately the standing charge totally just negates all that good work from the export, but that will improve as we get through the year. But having a bill of around about £50 for the month of January is not too bad. So I hope that was insightful and gives a peek into how much can be saved as a result of solar in the winter months. If you have enjoyed this video, feel free to press the like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in future months. There is also another video of why I picked specific components for my solar arrays, so I'd also recommend that one. But that's it for me today. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.